All right. I'm joined by the great Spike Eskin from the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast. Spike, a big trade just went down. I'm sure you've heard about it. James Harden's gone, and the Sixers get a bunch of
Pat,
guys back.
can I stop you for a second?
Oh, yeah.
Are you doing the podcast from your high school bedroom or something?
Yeah, this is my mom's house.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Don't act like you don't love it. Stop
I love it. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's very rude.
I know.
James Harden was traded, and I'm sure you've got some things to say. I'm sure you've already said some things about that, but
Sure.
James Harden goes to the Clippers. It's where he wanted to go. Sixers get back Robert Covington, Nicholas Batum, KJ Martin, Marcus Morris, bunch of draft picks. PJ Tucker goes with him. Are you sad to see James Harden go?
No. Sad it took so long, but it is what it is. He is really, in my life of watching basketball, and I am 47 and watched basketball for a good portion of it.
You're 47? Is that what you just said?
Don't start, man. Don't. You know exactly how old I am. You know what's sad? At some point, I'm actually going to be 50, and all your jokes about me being 50 from when I was like 31, you know, we've known each other a long time. Yeah. So I think in my life, I've never seen a player be so good in the regular season and fail like he did in the playoffs and be unwilling to sort of take ownership of it. But his failings, you know, were documented pretty well in Houston, but the final game against Miami 2 years ago, and then game 6 and game 7, and even really the Brooklyn series to an extent, were so bad last year that aside from all the weird stuff with Daryl and the trade request and all of that nonsense, just the fact that you knew that when it came down to it in crunch time, that you could not trust him, you know, all that stuff aside, I'm sorry. All that stuff aside, I'm glad to see him go because I would rather lose with somebody else holding the ball at this point, you know?
I think I agree with you. I used to joke, it's like a joking question. Who is the worst, greatest player of all time? And he's got to be up there, right? Like he and Russell Westbrook come to mind immediately. Now they're on the same team. But of guys that just like Russell Westbrook does not know his own limitations. And God bless him, incredible talent. Like, you know, he's one of the 100 best players of all time, I guess, you know, triple-double for a season. But James Harden has proven time and time again that he's like one of the worst great players of all time. And now it's like, was everything that he's done, is everything empty when it comes to James Harden? Everything in basketball, is it empty with him?
It's a good question. I do think because of his playoff failings, it is easy to forget how good he was in the regular season for a number of years, better than Westbrook in that he carried historically good offenses on teams that won 55 to 60 games, you know, and it's hard to remember that given the current context. I do think though, unless he finds a way in these last 3-4 years of his career to get to the finals or have signature performances in closeout games or backs to the wall, you know, games, I think his legacy will be looked at much different. I think he had a chance to be considered, I think, a top 10 player ever, but I think I don't think they failed the same way in the playoffs, but I think if nothing changes, he'll be remembered more like Karl Malone than he would be, you know, a top 10 player. But if he won a championship, it would be hard to not have it. Like he was scoring 38 points a game 5 years ago, you know? It would be hard to not have him a top 10 or top 15 player, but you can't fail like that over and over and over when it counts and still be considered that. Certainly not in the NBA, you know?
Off the top of my head, has there ever been someone as perpetually unhappy as James Harden? I mean, I guess this is kind of a new thing. It's only been the last couple of years, but 4 teams in 2 calendar years is like, it's another level of unhappiness. I don't quite understand it or know how to figure it out.
And I think it's like sort of deflection too. I think by him asking to leave, he's essentially saying what is wrong here is not me.
Right.
That the situation's wrong. And in Houston and Brooklyn, from afar, you could look at both of those things and say, I understand what you're saying. You couldn't do that here in Philly. So it draws into question the 2 times before that he did the same thing, you know? And you would have to bet the Clipper season will end in a disappointing way. And then you have to wonder at the end of that, then what becomes of him. Like I've said it a few times on the podcast, but I do think it's possible that he ends up playing in another country next year.
I was going to say, he's probably going to end up in China making $80 zillion a year.
For sure. Absolutely.
Pretty crazy that it's come to this. Now that with this situation, it's almost better to be a shrink than it is to be like someone who breaks down basketball, because that's what it's all about with James Harden. So it's not our problem anymore here in Philadelphia. Do you think that Daryl Morey got this trade right, or about as right as he could?
When there's only one team you can trade him to, you know what I mean? Like, I think getting 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a pick swap, and then no salary after this year, I think he got it as good as he could get it. I think if you're going to criticize him, it's in trading for him in the first place, or waiting too long to trade Ben, or I think there's certainly things that you can criticize Daryl for, but I don't think the return on this trade, which is pretty similar to what Drew Holiday just got traded for, I don't think you can criticize what he got in this trade, really.
Well, then go back to that. So in the end, was it worth it? Because you had Ben who wasn't going to play anyway. So how do you sum it up, I guess?
Yeah, I think that trade, you have to go back. I mean, this is too deep into it, but you have to say to yourself, okay, well, if Tyrese Halliburton was really available and that was really offered, and you ended up trading for Harden, that was a mistake. But you traded you trade 2 firsts and Ben Simmons for James Harden, and then you traded James Harden for 2 firsts, a swap, all this stuff. So I don't know. You also have to measure it against what were our options at the time. I still go back, and I have told him this. I told him this on our podcast, but he waited, and I kept telling him he waited too long to trade Ben. Like I know my podcast partner, Mike, always says that what happened to Ben was unpredictable. Like that moment, you could have never predicted that moment. That is wrong. Like it's wrong. You could see from a mile away that that other teams figuring him out, and his reluctance to adjust to that would eventually result in something like that, like something like that. And I think you could look at the signs of that happening. Maybe it doesn't happen exactly that way, but his value cratering, that was going to happen at some point. And I think Daryl waited too long on Ben.
You're up in New York. How's Ben doing these days?
Well, you watch Nets fans doing the same thing we did, talking themselves into it, and he's a good defender.
Tale as old as time.
With Ben. It's amazing. He is 6'10", a freak athlete, can dribble the ball. He doesn't shoot any free throws any game. How does that even happen? You know what I mean? How does that happen? So
I'm talking about it for like 8 years now. It defies logic. So Covington's back. Nick Batum, he's been around a long time. KJ Martin has some upside. Marcus Morris, he's like a Philly guy. How does this trade help now? And then I guess secondarily, how does it help in the future?
It helps now as long as, look, if Batum, I think Batum is playable. I think I would hope that that Covington is playable. KJ Martin is playable. Marcus Morris probably isn't. But we traded one guy and Petrushev was not playing. And Danny Green actually looked fine, but you basically traded a guy who was not playing for 3 guys who can play. And I think what happened was, to a certain extent, you looked on the bench every game and it felt really thin. I think just adding Batum and Martin and Covington for depth, and Batum and Covington are both, they're both on the other side of their prime, but they're both capable defenders and capable shooters, and Batum is a good passer. So if nothing else, it takes away that black cloud that was chasing them. It adds a couple of playable players, and I think it does give you some hope that at the deadline, if the right guy is there, by them having 3 picks to trade right now, they are in the market to do that, So I think it's good.
With he obviously hasn't played a lot this year, but like I guess peak Nick Batum kind of reminds me of like that Spider-Man meme. He and Tobias Harris are kind of like the same sort of player. Batum's a little bit bigger. Tobias probably has a little bit more of an offensive arsenal, but I don't know. For some reason, I've always kind of linked those two guys in my head as similar players.
I think the difference is that Tobias is a ball stopper and Batum is a ball mover. And I think that would be the biggest difference. Size-wise and who they defend is, as Batum has gotten slower and older, I would say that he was probably a far superior defender to Tobias 5 years ago. Today, Tobias has gotten better and Batum has gotten older, so I think they're probably interchangeable. And in terms of like their size, and I think I would agree. I think Batum, whereas Tobias is always looking for his offense, Batum is not. And I think that'll be that Mike has mentioned, my podcast partner Mike has mentioned a ton of times, the Sixers just over the last few years, aside from their primary ball handlers, have not had very many good passers. And even Maxey at this point, he's getting better, but it's not his primary function. So I think adding a guy who can move the ball is a good thing as well.
I know this might be an unpopular opinion amongst like Sixers Twitter. Mm-hmm. I love Robert Covington. I love the guy, and I'm glad that he's back.
He's a hero. Honestly, hero. when they signed him and he played on that process team, he was the first player we had who could shoot and was playable, and he changed the entire team. Like his presence on the team, just because he would shoot and he could shoot, and he could defend and he would defend, changed the entire team. And he got a lot of people would always say about Covington, he's not consistent enough.
Yeah.
Like you're either hitting 38% of your 3-pointers or you're not. There's no such thing as hitting exactly 3.8 out of 10 every game. That's not how it works. When you're essentially missing 6 or 6.5 out of 10, you're never going to seem like you're consistent because your success is too spread out, And
so I feel like he gets a bad rap. Like, all right, he blows lots of layups, would take gambles on defense, whatever it might be. But he's like the perfect Philadelphia athlete who literally comes out of nowhere to secure like a $70 million contract. We should love that.
Yeah, I totally. And I think that, Joel is the guy who is stuck around, who is like the crowning jewel of the process or whatever. Yeah. But to me, I think the 3 guys who exhibit that era better than anybody are Covington, Jeremy Grant, TJ McConnell. TJ was undrafted free agent. Covington was undrafted free agent. Jeremy Grant was 2nd-round pick. Jeremy Grant's now a $35 million a year player. TJ has carved out will play in the NBA for 18 years. And Covington ended up being like a real good player for a while. Yeah. I agree. He always worked hard. He always played well. He never complained, even when fans booed him for a whole year or whatever. I love Covington. I'm so happy.
I love Covington too. Yeah. Has this changed your outlook at all on this season, like, and where they'll end up?
Yeah, I think it has. I think them, honestly, the first 3 games did, as crazy as that sounds. I think the fact that they were able to, one, that Maxey looked as good as he did, and the other thing that they were able to prevent the Harden thing from collapse made me optimistic. They're not winning the title this year, but could they win in the second round, which they haven't? Sure. I don't see any reason why this team can't beat like Milwaukee or couldn't beat Miami or couldn't beat – I wouldn't bet on them to beat Boston, but they could beat any other team in the Eastern Conference in any other series. So sure.
Milwaukee's defense looks like an absolute disaster. So would assume that might change by the end of the year, but at least right now they look like a beatable team if you're mapping it out.
Well, even the offense, like watching Embiid and Maxey, or even watching Harden and Embiid, watching that 2-man game because Embiid can shoot is a lot different than watching Lillard and Giannis who can't shoot and doesn't want to roll to the rim every time, So I think, and Middleton has not looked great. He hasn't looked great in a couple of years, I think Milwaukee's beatable for sure.
All right, so then beyond this year is also of importance because it opens up a ton of cap space. They've got a lot of expiring contracts. Who then do you look at as someone who could be a fit down the road? And there are always guys like nobody knew Damian Lillard was going to go to Milwaukee. So there are always guys that pop up out of nowhere that become tradable. But I guess from where we are right now, how does this affect future seasons? And how does it keep Joel happy, I guess?
I think the guy, even though they have more assets now, it's still a pretty thin needle to thread or whatever. Because you have to be careful, because if you just trade one of those picks at the deadline for a good player, let's say, then you are limiting your ability to take that giant swing, So I think that they still have to be really careful in the move that they make. I still think that when you look at what they need, that Pascal Siakam is like the best target. Now, he is a free agent in the offseason, but I don't think you want to leave that to chance that he wants to come here. I think you have to probably, assuming Toronto is still bad at the deadline, maybe empty the clip and get him, and then assume that because you have his bird rights, you can re-sign him. I think it's probably something like that. I like Zach LaVine, but I don't think he is the guy. I don't think he's a perfect fit. OG Anunoby's a good player, but not a player that I would empty the clip for. I think Siakam is probably, looking at the guys that are now, I think that's the guy.
You've been doing this a long time. How long is it? It's 10 years old? Is it older than that now?
Yeah, older than 10. We are in our 11th season. So 10 years and 4 months or whatever.
When you look back, what do you think the most normal Sixers season has been in that time?
Not this one. Not last year. Not the one before. I would say probably the first Ben season?
The first Ben
Simmons season.
17?
Yeah, that was a pretty normal year. It was before Butler, so we didn't have that craziness. They surprised everyone. They went on that run at the end of the year.
I was going to say, was that the year they won like 14 or 16 in a row?
Then they lost in the second round, and everybody was still excited, and yada, yada, yada. I think that would be my guess.
So you're talking, what, 6 years ago now? 7 years ago?
7 years.
But they haven't had not even close to a normal season in 7 years.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with this franchise.
Very, very wrong. Yeah, I think
that's what keeps you in business, I guess. So it's not all bad.
It might be us, honestly. We might be the thing that's wrong, I think is possible.
Well, I've never thought of it in those terms, but now that you mention it, you might be right.
Yeah.
Do you care about what they wear? Like the City Connect jerseys getting a lot of flack. Like, does it matter to you? Do you care about jerseys and stuff like that?
It doesn't matter in a real way.
Yeah.
But they're bad. like it matters to me in that they're bad and they shouldn't have to be. Like, you should be able to like pay somebody a bunch of money to make them good. I can't figure out why they're so bad. They've been bad for years.
I thought they finally nailed it with the Spectrum.
They were good. You're right.
Were like good. Perfect. And they, of course, they're gone after 1 year. They were great. Just bring those back.
Everybody liked them too.
Yeah.
Everybody couldn't get enough of them. They wanted to buy all the merch. They wanted to buy the T-shirts. I remember trying to buy a hoodie. It sold out in 5 minutes or something. Yeah, make them the normal ones. I think it's funny. I know the NBA does it because they're like, oh, we can sell these jerseys and blah, blah, blah. Who's buying these jerseys? What are we talking about?
Have you seen, I don't think I've ever seen, maybe one or two people have the city skyline jersey or whatever that is, the black one.
Oh, yeah. New Philadelphia. Yeah, I remember that.
That
I don't know who buys any of these, to be honest with you. It's a very
No
strange
offense.
thing.
I love Reading Terminal Market. Great place to be, all that. But like, you can't craft a jersey off of that, can you?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. All right.
I don't think so.
All right. I've held you long enough. Tell the people where they can find your stuff.
Right. RickySanchez.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you, my friend. Good to see you.
Thanks, Pat.